The box is about the size of a paperback. It is waxed against the rain, so in the dark, your cold thumb slides on it once before it tears. Inside there are biscuits, a flat tin, a fruit bar, coffee powder, and 4 cigarettes. Printed on the outside is one word, and the word is breakfast. There are 2 more like it. One of them says dinner. One of them says supper. Between them they are your day, worked out to the ounce in another country by people who would never see this field. The field is in Normandy. It is about 200 yards by 400, and it is walled. Not fenced, walled, with a bank of damp-packed earth and old roots, higher than a man, and hedge growing out of the top of it. You cannot see the next field. You cannot see the far end of this one. The war is going on 80 yards away, through that wall, and you have not laid eyes on it. It is July of 1944. The question tonight is not whether you would have fought. Most of the men here went weeks without seeing anyone to fight. The question is whether you could have lived the way the box says to live. 3 meals, printed in order, in a field with no windows. For as long as it took, if you are warm and lying down and nearly asleep, you are in the right position for this. Let's open the first one. One thing before we get into the field, and then I'll leave you alone for 2 hours. If you are somewhere quiet tonight, say where below, your town, and what the clock has got to. I read them. Now get comfortable. Pillow where you want it. Blanket up over the shoulder. Where we are going, a man ate 3 times a day out of a cardboard box he carried on his own back, and counted himself well fed. Nothing here is dramatized or invented. Every detail comes from what these men and their army wrote down at the time. The manuals, the supply reports, and the surveys. The first food you carry into France is put into your hand in England, in a tented camp a few miles from the water, a day or 2 before you load. It is chocolate, and the instruction attached to it is that you do not eat it. This is the D ration, and it is not meant to feed you. It is emergency food, meant to hold a man up for very short periods in places where nothing at all can be brought to him. Beside it goes 1K ration, the boxed one, and 4 candle-type heat units of 1.5 ounces each. The candles ride in the haversack rather than in the box, because the request to pack them with the food was turned down. 3 more rations for every man travel behind you in the organization's load, C or K. That is the norm, set on paper before anyone crossed. What was in fact in one man's pocket was never recorded. 5 days of eating, on paper. 2 of those days ride in your clothes. Seasickness tablets and water purification tablets go into the same pockets in the same camp. The record says it was these things, handed over across a table, that first made a man understand the real character of the operation. The camp itself is not yours. The army moves you to France in 3 steps, and none of them is the crossing. A concentration area well back from the water. Then a marshalling camp. Then a point of embarkation usually only a few miles down the road. It is in the marshalling camp that things are put into your hands. The prescribed supply of rations, a life belt, maps, and whatever else the list calls necessary. That is also where the unit is told what it is going to do. You are meant to be inside one of these camps for 18 to 36 hours, though the assault units had been standing in these areas since the middle of May, waiting for a final embarkation 2 and 3 weeks later. Nobody who runs the camp belongs to your company. Feeding and quartering the troops passing through is done by service troops from the base sections, and every housekeeping duty is lifted off your unit at the gate. Your own kitchen is already packed, so the last meals you eat in England are cooked by men you will not see again, in a mess your outfit did not build, and after that the cooking stops for a long time. The K ration is built for a pocket, and that is the whole of its design argument. 3 packages, each of a convenient size to be pocketed. C and K are both intended for short periods only, when the tactical situation prevents any better arrangement for feeding men. None of them exists in quantity. The theater's authorized stock of C, K, and 10-in-1 rations put together comes to only 8 days that spring, and the landing exercises eat into it. What the crossing looks like from the deck is not in the record anywhere. What is in the record is the machinery. Barges built out of pontoon sections with outboard motors on them, called rhino ferries, towed the whole way across with their crews standing on open unprotected decks. 2 of those could empty 1 landing ship. Amphibious trucks of 2.5 tons carried a large share of the first cargo into the sand. You do not wade. In the later echelons, the craft runs itself onto the beach on a falling tide, discharges after the water has gone out, and waits for the next tide to lift it off again. Men and vehicles come off the ramp onto dry sand. The beach is a flat strip of sand with hills behind it, and steep rocky bluffs standing straight up out of the water at either end. The tide goes a long way out. Between low water and high water there are 300 yards of hard, closely packed sand, cut here and there by runnels. That is the first ground you walk on in France, and you walk across it carrying 5 days of food. For the first days, the men on the beachhead live almost entirely on the operational rations they brought with them. Large-scale issue of food begins on the 9th of June, the 3rd day after the landings, and what is issued is mainly C and K. The arithmetic of it is 3 days. 3 days on what you carried, and on the 4th, the Army hands you something out of a pile. The plan had said the first few days would be C and K entirely, with half of every delivery after the 5th day made up of the 10-in-1. 6 days was the limit set for issuing C and K at all. By the 2nd week, most 1st Army units are drawing rations from truck heads in the Cerisy forest and at Isigny, which are supplied in turn from a dump laid down near Omaha Beach. Beach, dump, truckhead, company. That is the whole length of the road your food travels. There is no port at the end of that road. For the first month, more than 98 of every 100 tons landed on the continent comes over open. Beach. Cherbourg falls at the end of June and cannot begin working until the 16th of July. A full 3 weeks after its capture, because the harbor has to be rebuilt before it can take anything. The small ports do very little. By the end of June, Isigny and Grand Camp together have handled less than 5,000 tons. Then the weather shuts the waterline. Beginning on the 19th of June and going on for 3 days, high winds pound the invasion coast, wreck scores of craft, and smash the artificial harbor. On the 19th, more than 8,000 tons still come ashore. By the 22nd, it is 500, and then the wind drops, and the amphibious trucks go back to work. None of that changes what is in your pocket. The chocolate is exactly where it was when they put it in your hand in England. Not on the crossing, not on the sand, not in the field you are standing in now. It is the one piece of food you are carrying in order not to eat. The field you are standing in is about 200 yards by 400. Most of them here are that size, and the smallness is the whole point of the place. Because the fields are tiny, the hedgerows are innumerable. The fields are irregular in shape as well, so the lines they make follow no logical pattern. There is no grid to hold in your head. This is the bocage, and the American soldiers holding it call the whole of it the hedgerow country. A hedgerow is a fence, half earth and half hedge. On the ground you are on, the approaches to Saint-Lô. The earth part is a bank 3 to 5 feet thick and 6 to 9 feet high. Further up the peninsula they run wider and taller, 1 to 4 feet or more through, and 3 to 12 feet up. Either way, the earth alone stands at your chest or over your head, and the earth is only the bottom of it. Out of the top of the bank grows the hedge itself, hawthorn, brambles, vines and trees, 1 to 3 feet thick and anywhere from 3 to 15 feet high, with rows of trees along the crest. Underneath all of it are the roots, holding the bank together. Along one side of the mound, and sometimes both, runs a ditch, and the ditch is counted as part of the obstacle. Where the ditch is dry, it makes a good site for a shelter or a foxhole. The farmers built these walls to enclose every plot of arable land they had, pasture as well as orchard, no matter how small, and they have been doing it for centuries. The hedgerows keep the ocean winds off the crops and the cattle. They also give the households their firewood. Each field has one opening in the wall, for people, for cattle, and for carts. And where the fields meet, the openings sit in the corners. What the wall takes from you is distance. Observation is normally limited from one hedgerow to the next, and a man can seldom see clearly beyond the confine of his own field. The vegetation is heavy and the trees are everywhere. They hide things, they obstruct observation, and they make artillery fire hard to correct. The one thing that widens the horizon is an accidental structure, usually a village church tower. In country this free of hills, the towers get used as observation posts, and the tower is not yours. The same wall takes something else. It is difficult to keep physical contact with the squads and platoons on either side of you, and difficult to determine exactly where you are. Small units feel isolated because of it. Men forward decide that the others must be behind them, since they are not in the next field over, and sometimes the others are in fact ahead. Flanks cannot be covered with fields of fire the way they can in open ground. Tactically, each of these enclosures is a tiny compartment of terrain, and several of them adjoining make a defensive position with depth already built into it. That is the description in the record, and it is also the description of your day. The walls of the room are earth and roots. The door is the gap in the corner. What you can see, you see inside it. The roads run between the hedgerows, narrow and winding, and the wagon trails that reach the fields, with no road frontage wind among them without number. The trails look like sunken lanes, dropped below the level of the fields on both sides. Where the hedgerows are high, the tops arch over and shut out the light, and what you are walking in is a cave-like labyrinth, gloomy and damp. Movement across the peninsula happens inside well-defined corridors, and the corridors are blocked by the walls. Not all of the enclosures are pasture. Some hold orchards of low-growing apple trees, and there are occasional patches of grain, but more of the ground is grazing than anything else. An orchard is a room too, with the same walls around it, and the apple trees standing in it are old and crooked. On the approaches to Saint-Lô, one such orchard held automatic weapons dug in among the trees, and it was not cleared until the end of the day. The people live gathered together. The farmers here keep to small scattered villages and hamlets, in houses of stone and rubble masonry laid up in mortar. Before the landings, the people of this district were mainly concerned with the breeding of cattle and the making of butter and cheese, and even the occupation had not greatly interfered with that. A single farm is usually a substantial set of buildings grouped around a courtyard. The largest village near the invasion beaches had about 800 people before the war, and the whole district under 10,000. One good lateral road runs the length of the ground the Allies hold, from Cherbourg down through Carentan and on toward Caen. Until the middle of July, the middle stretch of it is the only good paved road on the beachhead, and the secondary roads break up quickly under heavy traffic because of the soil. So there is one line of movement and everything travels on it. Cherbourg is behind you, north, at the top of the peninsula. Saint-Lô is ahead of you, south. Saint-Lô had about 11,000 people before the war. It stands on low ground by a loop of the Veer, ringed by hills, and its whole military value is that roads leave it in every direction. Carentan is the junction in the middle of that single lateral road, and Carentan is little more than 3 miles from the front. German field artillery shells the town and its small road bridge from time to time. West of Carentan, the walls stop. The marshes there lie in places below sea level, old arms of the sea, and they are the one break in the hedgerow country, giving a long view across empty bog. The rivers sit so near sea level that the water does not run at any speed, but oozes toward the ocean, and the streams look like standing water. Where the low ground is dry enough to farm, the fields are smaller still, so the hedgerows are more numerous and higher and thicker. Behind you, the whole position is shallow. By the middle of July, the troops are barely 20 miles inland from the beaches, measuring the day's gain in yards, and every depot is 20 miles from the front line or less. The beachhead is crammed and congested. The airstrip sits so close to the sand that flying interferes with traffic on the ground. There is no deep rear to be fed from. There is a strip of country 20 miles wide with everything inside it. The field kitchen stands somewhere in that strip. By the book, kitchens bivouac by battalion and their supplies are delivered to them there. The kitchen trucks then carry the kitchens themselves, or food already cooked, forward to the line at night and go back for more. The book also puts control stations along the route so that the truck groups do not get lost on the way. In a country where a man cannot say exactly where he is, that clause has weight. Somewhere back down the sunken road, at a bivouac you have never seen, there is a truck with a kitchen on it. The hour that ends the night is not recognized by light. It is recognized by what begins in it. The ground gives you nothing to look at before the sky does, and the sky comes late to a field walled in by earthen roots. What tells you the hour has turned is movement, men going forward through the dark, toward a line drawn on somebody's map, and guns opening at a time written down days earlier. The light arrives afterward. It finds the work already started. The times are on record. On the 3rd of July, the infantry plodded through the darkness and the mud toward the line of departure. At 5:15, the artillery began a preparation of 15 minutes, and the attack went in at 5:30. With rain that had started before morning still coming down. 4 days later, on the approaches to the Veer, the corps and division artillery moved their fires close in while it was still dark, and the troops reached the riverbank in the last of that darkness. The day of that attack is set down as foggy and overcast, with showers coming through it at intervals. The clock in those reports is a clock of attacks, and it is the only clock this field is given. At the other end of the day, the light held, in the fighting towards St. Lo, 8 in the evening still counted as light. The dark part of a Normandy summer day is short, and a great deal is packed into it. Both ends of that darkness are when things get moved. Tanks, tank destroyers, and self-propelled guns were put into position just before daylight or at dusk, because those are the 2 windows in which a vehicle can be placed and not be watched being placed. The same logic runs all the way down to one man with a shovel. Whatever has to change its position, a weapon, a wire, a load of ammunition, changes it in the hour when the eye works worst, and then stays exactly where it was put. The other side kept the same clock. Below Hill 122, the enemy counterattacked repeatedly through a dark and rainy night. And it was the morning of the 7th of July that ended it. Another night in the hedgerows is set down as rainy and pitch black, fought through to hold the ground. And the account of it turns on 3 words. When morning came, light does not stop a fight. What light takes away is the reason for the night's method. There is a reason both sides treat these hours as the dangerous ones. When a fight is broken off by darkness, combat outposts are established at once, and at night, they lie closer to their own organization than they would by day. They put out listening posts, whose whole task is to warn the front line that something is coming toward it. That arrangement is an admission. At night, the eye is out of work, and the whole shape of a position has to be rebuilt every evening and taken apart again every morning. You wake where you are, and where you are is a hole at the foot of an earth bank. If the weather has been bad, there is a shelter half stretched over the hole, with a small opening left in it to observe through and to fire through. When the weather clears, the shelter half comes off and the hole is camouflaged again. The wet in the hole did not settle overnight out of clear air. It is rain, and the mud the rain made, and it is already there when your eyes open onto nothing. Men who had done a stretch of this put their own discipline into one line. In the daytime, stay in the hole and under cover, and at night, be quiet and do not smoke. Both halves of it belong to the hours around the light. The one thing the reports insist on every day is the feet. A man should be trained to take his shoes and socks off each day and rub them. And that sentence sits in the same paragraph as the requirement that he be able to live in the field, in cold and rain and mud, for many days together. It does not say when. It cannot be done on an outguard, where the weapon stays at hand and the equipment stays on. So it waits for a quiet hour, and the hour before light is not one of those. Where you sleep was settled by a rule about trees. A regimental report out of Normandy puts it in one line. Avoid the areas near large trees when digging in. A shell that meets branches opens above a hole instead of in front of it. So the holes sit out along the bank, in the open part of the field, and the morning you wake into is the morning of a field, and not of a wood. 2 things are forbidden in the dark, and both of them are ordinary. On an outguard, no fires are built, and no smoking is permitted unless you are told you may, and loud talking and any other noise are to be avoided. Smoking at night in forward areas was prohibited outright. Where patrols were allowed a hot meal that involved a fire, it was the noon meal. No fires were allowed in the morning or in the evening. The cigarette and the flame both belong to daylight, and daylight is not here. The first food of the day is a box, and the box says what it is for. The one for this hour is marked for it, and that mark is the only thing in the field that knows what time it is. Whatever else the army had failed to get into this field, it had got the hours in. The shape of your day is printed on cardboard, and you are holding it in the dark. Inside the breakfast carton, alongside the biscuits and the flat can, there is soluble coffee, sealed in a flat paper packet. That was the plan for the continent. Soluble coffee was to replace canned coffee in the B ration from the day of the landing through the 30th day after it. The plan says nothing about heat. Nothing in a hole makes water hot, and nothing before light is permitted to try. The coffee stays in the carton until there is a fire, and there is no fire until there is light. So whatever gets eaten before light gets eaten cold, and by feel, sitting with your back against earth. Nothing in the carton has to be cooked, which is the whole reason the carton exists. Nothing in it is quick either. Hard food in the dark takes time, and so does finding the small wrapped things by touch. None of that is the difficult part. The difficult part comes afterward, and it is waiting for enough light that a match becomes allowed. By then the guns may have started somewhere off to the left, on a schedule written down for 4:30 or for 5:15, and the field you still cannot see is doing what it does most mornings. You know the hour by that and not by the sky. Your hands know the rest of it already. The carton, the flat packets, the seam where the cardboard opens. You have found all of them, and the light has not come. The K ration comes to you in 3 boxes, and each box is one meal: breakfast, dinner, supper. That is how the ration was finally standardized. A separate unit for each eating of the day. Nothing in one box is meant for the hour of another. The army has taken a day, divided it into 3, and printed the divisions on cardboard. That is the plan, and you carry all 3 boxes of it at once. Each unit is built to survive being carried. The meat, the cheese, and the egg components ride in hermetically sealed cans, and everything else is in sealed bags. All of it sits inside an inner carton that has been dipped in a wax, which does not melt until the temperature passes 146 degrees. And over that carton goes an outer one, closed with a water-resistant glue. The soldier's own pamphlet says it in a single line: Field Ration K, paraffin-coated boxes of food for use in combat situations. Out of the breakfast unit, the coffee comes first. 5 grams of it, soluble, in a small flat package. And it is the only coffee the day holds. No heat units are requisitioned with the K ration at all. The reasoning was that the dumps would hold a surplus from the C rations, if the troops wanted any. Even in the most active situations, troops usually managed to heat a drink, in a canteen cup, over 1 heat unit. There were not enough of those either. The number on hand was 3 million short of what the plan called for on the day of the landing. The rest of the box you take apart in your hands, and the order is your own. The can of meat and egg product opens with the key that came with it. The biscuits stay in their packets until there is a reason to eat them. The fruit bar will keep, so it goes back into a pocket, and the sugar tablet goes into the coffee or after the fruit bar. The 4 cigarettes go into the pocket as well, because there is no light before daylight. That is why the infantryman prefers the K. It can be carried whole in its 3 boxes, or broken up and distributed through the pockets, which cannot be done with 6 round metal cans. The dinner unit is the cheese one, and it is the box you leave shut at breakfast. 4 ounces of cheese products sit in the can, and behind them come the same biscuits a second time. with candy pressed in beside them. What matters most about this box is not food at all. Of the three, only this one holds a clip of matches. A man who wants a light has one box to go to and not three. Soldiers said plainly that they dislike the malt dextrose tablets, and what a man will not eat he leaves in the carton. The printed day is tested that way, not by what the table put in but by what comes out. The lemon powder is the other one that stays, and it stays until the middle of the day, when there is water to put it in. Supper is the meat box again, with the biscuits a third time. 10 grams of bouillon powder go into the cup. Because the coffee was used at first light, there is none in this one. Under everything, flat against the bottom of the carton, lies a 2-ounce bar of the D rations. One thing is true of all three boxes. Every meal of the K ration contained pork, and of the old type of C ration only the meat and vegetable stew was without it. The army found that out when it had to feed the Muslim soldiers of a French armored division before the landing. The bar in the supper box is not there to feed you. The 3 4-ounce bars that make up the D ration were never intended to sustain a soldier. The purpose was an emergency reserve, carried by troops in combat areas. In this theater, there was an attempt to issue the D on top of the C and the K, to raise the bulk of what a man received. The attempt was not successful. The bar was unpopular, and that was the whole reason. Beside the K, there is the C, and the C is 6 cans. 3 of them are meat units and 3 are bread units, 12 fluid ounces to a can. The food can be eaten cold and tastes better hot. When you are moving, the 3 cardboard boxes win, and the 6 round cans stay behind. When you are standing still and living on operational rations, the preference reverses. The C has more meat, it is more filling, and it can be heated in the can, directly over a flame, which the K cannot. Above both of them sits the 10-in-1, which is less a ration than a crate. Inside it are canned meat and vegetables, spreads and evaporated milk, and a K ration put in for the noon meal, virtually a portable B ration, built for troops in forward areas that a field kitchen cannot serve. The package weighs 45 pounds and wants a small stove beside it, so it goes where there is a vehicle to carry it. It also feeds 10 men at a time, which means it is opened and heated by a group, rather than by one man with a cup. In the hedgerows, that is the ration that actually got eaten. By the middle of July, the theater's own accounting showed the units in Normandy drawing about 140% of the planned quantity of 10-in-1, against half the planned K and 2/5 of the planned C. The reason given was the ground itself. While the fighting stayed in the hedgerows, the rations suited to that kind of fighting were the ones that got drawn. There was a limit written down for all of this before anyone landed. The Class 1 plan for the operation specified that the 10-in-1 was not to be issued for more than 20 days. The packaged rations, the report said afterwards, were very successful at providing a palatable and nourishing diet, so long as they were not consumed over too long a period. 20 days is the number the plan put on paper. How it is actually eaten has no procedure attached to it. During the period of intense combat, troops ate when and where they had the time, on the rations they carried or on composite packed rations brought up from the rear. There were no sheltered mess holes. The ground or a rock was used as a table and as a chair, and the aim was adequacy rather than variety. Field observers who knew how readily the American combat soldier criticized anything connected with the rear recorded surprisingly little complaint about the food itself. Type K was still reported the most popular of the operational rations of the campaign in Normandy and northern France. Popularity and consumption are two different measurements, and here they point in different directions. The ration men liked best was not the ration that fed them through the hedgerows. What is printed on the cardboard does not change either way. The breakfast unit is empty now, the wax carton lying open, and the dinner box sits beside your knee unopened. Inside it, 7 grams of lemon juice powder in a sealed packet. No use to anybody until it is put into water. Water that has come through the army's hands has a taste, and the taste is faint and exact. The manuals name it themselves. A slight chlorinous taste, the medical record says, is what 2 tablets in a canteen give a man. Nobody wrote down what the taste was called in a hedgerow. What is written down is the procedure that put it there, and the taste is the last step of that procedure arriving in your mouth. Getting the water is not a medical job. The Corps of Engineers is responsible for procuring and treating it, for operating everything that collects water, purifies it, and gives it out. The medical department only surveys and inspects and examines. Somewhere inside the procedure, a man asks a farmer where the well is. Before that, the looking is done on paper, and it begins long before the troops arrive. Geological and topographic maps, aerial photographs, and government reports. A water point arrives on a truck. Off it comes a motorized pump with its sand filter and its chlorinator, and a collapsible canvas tank holding 3,000 gallons, which when erected stands about 4 feet high, a little above the belt. First, an engineer technician opens a kit of test tubes and chemicals and tests the source for potability, for turbidity, and for poison. Then the squad has water pumping through the filters, and that takes about half an hour. Each engineer battalion carries equipment for 4 such points, sets up 2 forward and 1 or 2 back, and leapfrogs the rear ones over the forward as the divisions go on. How far the nearest stands from any field here, no report says. The trucks that go for the water are your own. The arms and services provide their own vehicles to haul it from the engineer points. And where the point is far back, tankers fill an intermediate stop where unit trucks come for 5-gallon cans. A letter W painted on a can identifies water. The cans without it hold gasoline, and the grade is told by strands of wire on the handle. The last stretch has no wheels in it. Water is brought up to the forward troops in those cans, carried by hand from the nearest supply point or the end of the nearest jeep road. The bulletins that gathered up what units had learned put it without decoration. Water was the most critical item of supply to frontline troops through a whole campaign. On the margin of the same page, one line stands by itself. Always be on the lookout for good water. The Lister bag is the other half of the system, and it is a thing described in a manual rather than one anyone recorded standing in a hedge. 36 gallons of heavy canvas or rubberized cloth, issued at the rate of 1 for each 100 men, hung from a tripod or a branch. The water goes in strained through clean cloth, filled to a mark 4 inches down from the top. A tube of calcium hypochlorite is broken in and stirred to the bottom with a clean stick. Then the waiting starts, and the waiting is the part a line of men feels. The faucets are disinfected on their own account. Half a canteen cup drawn from each and poured back into the bag. 10 minutes later, the water is tested, and it is not to be used until 30 minutes after the hypochlorite went in. That half hour is not caution somebody added. It is the dose doing its work. In the canteen, the same thing happens smaller. 2 halazone tablets are needed for every quart, which is 1 canteenful of clear water, and 4 if it is muddy or off color. Shake it, and in 30 minutes the bacteria are destroyed. The tablets need several of those minutes only to dissolve. You have carried them since England, handed over in the marshalling camp with the seasickness tablets and the heat units. 2 tablets in a canteen come to about 4.5 parts of chlorine in a million, and of that dosage the record says, in its own words, that it gives a slight chlorinous taste. The taste is in the dose and not in an error. Where there is more chlorine than necessary, the water is still entirely safe to drink, and the manual's remedy is not a chemical but a dilution. Draw some off and refill with fresh water. Boiled water draws a different complaint. It is called flat, and flat is cured by pouring it from one vessel into another. When the Army wrote out for industry the tablet it wanted, the 6th requirement was that it should not impart objectionable taste or color. Those are the words the record keeps for it, and what actually takes the taste out is time. Standing for 2 or 3 hours will usually remove it, and standing is the one thing a canteen on a belt cannot do. One paragraph of the manual is headed Water for Beverages, and it is a prohibition. If the water requires disinfection with chlorine, the proper contact time must elapse before any flavoring ingredient is added. And it is completely wrong to assume that a beverage preparation can purify water. A rule printed that plainly is a rule about something men were doing. The lemon powder from the ration box goes in after the half hour, or it goes in against orders, and either way, it does nothing to the water. The discipline held, whatever it tasted like. Through the whole war, no major outbreak of intestinal disease among the troops was ever traced back to water that had come through this system. The figures for how much a man needs are the regulations figures, not a count taken in this country. Men in the field cannot be kept in good health, it says, on less than a gallon a man each day for drinking and cooking. On the march or in bivouac, 2 gallons. Under average conditions of combat, men can get along as long as 3 days on 1.5 quarts to 2 quarts a day. Your canteen holds 1 quart. Salt rides in the same pocket, and the regulation ties it to water rather than to weather. The amount in a normal diet covers a man drinking less than a gallon a day. Drink more than that and more salt is needed. Swallowing the tablets whole is not recommended because nausea frequently results. The prescribed way is 1/4 teaspoon dissolved in a canteenful, and if no water is available, no extra salt should be taken. Against that arithmetic stands the other rule. A commander should never permit water drinking unless the supply has been approved by a medical officer or properly treated. And French purification and sewage, never the best, were assumed before the landings to have failed. In Northern Ireland, the troops had been taught to treat private supplies as polluted until proven otherwise. The well in the farmyard behind the hedge is not an approved supply, and no report says whether anyone drank from it. So the canteen goes back on the belt. It holds 1 quart. It was filled from a can that came the last part of the way in somebody's hands, and the water in it was treated once at the point and again by the tablet. The cap screws down. The cover stays damp on the outside and does not dry. It knocks against your hip when you stand, and it is what you will reach for without looking for the rest of the day. The first cut you make is not into the field. It goes into the bank, and the blade stops almost at once. Whatever grows out of that bank has gone down into it as well, and the spade finds hawthorn and bramble and the stems of trees before it finds much soil. You put your boot on it and lever out a hand's width of earth, and then another. Nothing here gives way on the first push. The hole that works in this country has a bend in it. Adequate protection from mortar and artillery fire. The account of the Coton fighting says, could be had from a hole in the shape of the letter L, dug into the embankment, and then laterally along the axis of the row. You are going sideways into the wall you are already standing behind, and then turning the hole to run with it. The automatic weapons go into the corners of the field, where they can cover the open ground in front, and also fire along the line of the hedge. The tool is on your belt, and it stays there. A quartermaster observer wrote that the entrenching shovel is one of the few items the fighting soldier will not discard, but will carry right into battle with him. On every new position, he wrote, whether the unit is going forward or falling back, digging a hole is absolutely necessary. He put the last of it in capital letters. When foxholes are needed, they are usually needed in a hurry and deep. By the table of equipment, it is a small thing. It is 22 inches long and weighs 29.5 ounces, and the newer one folds. The blade locks at a right angle and works as a hoe, then closes flat against the handle for carrying. The official verdict on it was written without flattery. An adequate shovel, a good hoe, only a fair pick, and an indifferent axe. Roots were a recognized problem long before this field, and when the folding shovel was adopted, the arms and services insisted that the pick, mattock, and the axe were still essential in addition to it. One blade does not take a bank apart. What takes a bank apart is explosive. A regimental commander in France reported that his people were issued half a stick of it each, officers and enlisted men alike, with fuse and detonator, taped to a trench knife sheath or a pistol holster. Most men carried the fuse and detonator inside the canteen cover. The ground, he wrote, can be shattered enough that a man digs his hole in 10 minutes. 2 sticks and 15 minutes give a hole that will hold against a tank. Medium soil and chalk take it best. That regiment belongs to the division that came into Normandy at the end of June, took over the ground near Carentan from the airborne, and attacked down the Payrier Road on the 4th of July. So the figure is from your month and your fields. 10 minutes is the time with explosive underneath it. For a man with a shovel and a bank full of wood, nobody wrote a figure down at all. There is only the observer's line, in a hurry and deep. There is a standard, and it was measured on level ground. An artillery unit set its trench at 2 feet wide, 3.5 feet deep, and as long as the man was tall, with the spoil piled at the ends rather than the sides, and covered over with sod. Earth at the end stops what travels along the line, hides more easily, and keeps the trench from taking the bathtub shape that shows from the air. The fourth reason given was plain comfort. With the sides clear of spoil, a man sits in it better through the hours when nothing happens. In the bank, the depth is not yours to choose. Ground sets its own limit. Engineers found that holes dug in beach sand could not go past 3 feet without revetting, or the sides came in on them. Here the limit is wood and the thickness of the wall. Men coming back kept making the same comparison. It was always very easy to tell a German foxhole from an American one, because the German hole was much deeper. The report that carried the remark said 2 words beside it in heavy type: dig deep. Trees stand on the top of the bank directly over your head, and a shell that catches them bursts downward. Veterans of the Airborne Division put that first on their own list of lessons. Dig deep and cover the hole against air bursts and tree bursts. The poncho serves, a rectangle of rubberized cloth with a hole in the middle, used as a ground sheet, as a wrapper for a sleeping bag, and as a lid over the hole. Where there is time, logs are cut and stacked near the line of departure, then carried forward to roof holes as they are dug. The one thing meant for sleeping comes with your hole written into its exception. The wool sleeping bag was held suitable for everyone except the men in the very forward holes. That is, except anyone who cannot count on 30 seconds of warning before he has to fight. Some reports asked for blankets instead. For the same reason, a bag takes time to get out of. A roof makes men careless, and that was written up out of this ground. A regiment in the San Lo sector reported that its people grew slack about camouflage at night, and slackest of all once they had dug in under trees. German aircraft dropped flares over the position and came back to bomb it. From the following night onward, every slit trench was camouflaged, and every piece of equipment kept out of sight. The rain belongs to the digging as much as the roots do. The summer threatened to become the rainiest in many years, which made the marshy ground worse and slowed everything on the narrow roads between the fields. 3 divisions went forward abreast in a downpour on the 3rd of July. 6 days later, on the 3rd day of that fighting and the 3rd of intermittent rain, the troops were wet and muddy from their leggings to the tops of their helmets. Over all of it, the history says, a steady rain was to pour. The water does not only come from above. By the start of July, the almost incessant rain of the previous weeks had soaked the ground past saturation. The drainage ditches swelled into streams, the swamps turned into ponds, and the surface of the fields became a potential sheet of mud. Where 2 rows run side by side, there is a ditch between them, and that ditch is cut to carry water off the field. Whatever it cannot carry stays. You are digging into the foot of a bank that has been draining into itself for weeks. A sergeant of an infantry regiment put the use of the hole into one sentence. "Always dig in," he said, "and when the fire comes down on you, stay in that hole and sweat it out." That is what you dug it for. He had watched men lose their nerve and go looking for somewhere that seemed safer. And the looking was the mistake. By the time your digging is done, the light is full and the field is quiet. There is a hand's depth of water standing in the bottom of the hole, brown with the shape of the spade still in it. In the middle of the day, nothing is scheduled. The regulation gives an official reason, and it belongs to another country. The best means of saving water, it says, is to reduce the hard work done during the heat of the day. There is no heat of the day here. There is a gray hour in which the light comes up a little. The ground gives nothing back, and the work that would be done is not. The weather is not the background to this summer. It is the summer. The amount of cloud and wind and rain in June and July of this year is greater than any recorded since the turn of the century. And it is being recorded over your head. June came in with a clammy cold rain. It kept the swamps flooded, slowed the roads, canceled the advantage in the air, hid what the other side was doing, and left the individual soldier wet, muddy, and dispirited. The days have dates on them. A few minutes after midnight on the 2nd of July, a drizzling rain began to fall, and by the hour of the attack it was a downpour. The troops went forward through the darkness and the mud. The driving, drenching rain that began early on the 3rd was still pouring at 5:30. On the 7th, continuing rain and deep mud. Men lay in holes that had filled with it. Through the first weeks of July, the rain is almost incessant. It has turned the moist fields of this country into ponds of mud. and stopped vehicles where they stand. What it did to the men living in it was set down plainly at the time. The rain and the sticky, sickening mud it made left the ground troops wondering whether they would ever be warm and clean and dry again. That is the whole of a day at noon. The roads take it as badly as the fields. Few are macadam even at the best. The great majority are gravel, and none hold up under wheels and tracks. In wet weather they are slippery or muddy. During the infrequent periods of sunshine they quickly become dusty. A single regiment on the move needs a good 14 miles of road, so traffic goes at a walking pace, often bumper to bumper. When the sun does come out, it brings the flies with it. In cool weather, flies gather in the warmth of the sun, and in hot weather they keep to the shade. And this country is cool, so the rare bright hour is the one they come out into. And they come out where you sit with a box open in front of you. Adult flies are drawn by odors. Any odor will do it, and food is an odor. They rest on vertical surfaces and hanging objects, which in a field like this means the face of the bank, the equipment hung on it, the rim of a helmet. The range of a fly's flight is usually 200 to 1,000 yards. So the one on the biscuit in your hand came from a hedge or two over. The temperature they breed best in is 80 to 95 degrees. And cold and dry air draw the larval stage out instead. This June has held them down. There are 3 things that can be done about flies. They can be killed, they can be stopped from breeding, and they can be kept away from food and utensils. The equipment for the first 2 lives where the kitchens are. A 30-day supply of fly paper and swatters to each organization. The strips hung clear of tables and stoves, since flies can drop from them into the food. A hand sprayer is used on the one sitting on a wall, and what it knocks down is to be swept up and burned. In a field, there is only the 3rd thing, and it is done with a hand. The noon meal is officially cold, and there is a paper trail that says so. 21 days after the landings on the 27th of June, the theater's chief quartermaster toured the battle areas and found the packaged rations popular enough, but the lemon and orange fruit juice concentrates being thrown away. On the 2nd of July, he asked for the matter to be taken up, and the answer came back on the 13th. Coffee would replace the fruit powder in 3 of the supper menus. The fruit crystals stayed in the lunches, and the reason given is the flattest sentence in the file. Hot water for making a beverage was not usually available at the noon meal. That is the record's own description of the hour you are in. Something hot comes up in an insulated container, or a 5-gallon water can wrapped in blankets when there is no container. And at midday, it usually does not come at all. The powder had been in every ration since the year before, put there to make a noontime beverage. Cheap, plentiful, carrying vitamins the cans do not have, and keeping in store. It also had a sharp acidity that could only be covered by an enormous quantity of sugar. Cooks were taught a dozen tricks for disguising it or coaxing the troops into drinking it, all of them in vain. The troops detested synthetic lemonade and every variant of it, and the complaints came in from observers in the Mediterranean and in Europe alike. There is a line in the file that explains the whole misunderstanding. The crystals would be used in the quantities intended only in a hot climate. Normandy in this June and this July is not a hot climate. There is advice for drinking through such an hour. Take small amounts whenever you feel like it rather than holding out for the meal, since a man who waits may suffer without gaining by it. Thirst quenchers, chewing gum, and fruit drops may decrease the discomfort of thirst, but are otherwise of no advantage. That is what the day offers between one box and the next, a mouthful of treated water and gum that does nothing. The sea took its own turn at it in the middle of June. A 4-day storm struck the channel without warning on the 19th. The wind came up from the northeast early that morning, and the sea it raised soon stopped every amphibious truck and ferry craft on both beaches. On the 20th, the floating breakwater tore loose, all 24 units of it adrift, and 60% of the ferry craft stayed unusable for a day and a half after the wind dropped. The pace of the fighting is set by the fields, and not by any of this. Go forward slowly, the instruction runs. Take one hedgerow at a time and clean it up. At that rate, and the rate is often a single hedgerow in a day, the troops could see the war lasting 20 years. An afternoon is measured against that. Nothing is expected of it, and the next thing on the schedule is a box exactly like the one already open. So you sit with your back against the bank, and the wet comes through the wool, and the food is there, and you are not hungry for it. The flies come and go with the light. None of this is an injury. It is only that the body has been wet a long time, and everything hanging on it has taken on water, and weighs more than it did in the dark this morning, and all of it will be carried anyway. Everything on you was decided in advance, on paper, by people who counted it in pounds. The list that governs the load is an annex to the First Army Plan for the landing, dated the 25th of February, and it runs from the day of the landing through the 44th day after it, which takes it to the 3rd week of July. It is a table of allowance and not a description of a man. Still, every item against your body has a line somewhere in it. Start with what does not come off. The steel helmet and its liner. Wool underneath everything, in July as in any other month. The wool drawers and the wool undershirt, the flannel shirt and the wool trousers over them. Service shoes with canvas leggings above them, and not the 2-buckle boot, which comes later and belongs to another season. The cotton gloves and the wool hood are on the list too, marked to be put on if and when the order is given, which is the table's way of saying they are carried and never worn. What hangs on you sorts itself by how often you reach for it. The canteen rides in its cover with the cup nested underneath, so the thing you drink from and the thing you drink out of travel as one object and come off together. The first aid pouch and the magazine pouch sit where a hand goes without looking. The 2 identification tags on their chain are the only items on the list that are not meant to be used at all today. The field bag with its strap is marked as allowed rather than issued, and that qualification appears against more than one line of the table. Inside the haversack, most of what the table puts there stays there. The meat can and the spoon come out at every halt and go back damp. The halazone bottle moves to a pocket because water is a several times a day business and the pack is not. 4 heat units of 1.5 ounces apiece wait for whatever gets heated. Below all of that lie the things that will not be touched between one issue and the next. A knife, a 2-ounce can of insecticide, a raincoat rolled down small, 3 pairs of light wool socks, and one of the protective kind, toilet articles and a huck towel. The manual is exact about where the food goes. Rations are placed in the center of the haversack, in front of and touching the line of attachment of the inside flap. The toilet articles go in front of the rations. The inside flap folds over both. When rations are not carried, the toilet articles are rolled into the inside flap so that their top comes level with the top of the haversack body. That is the regulation, written before the war, and it is why the food sits against your spine rather than at the bottom of the bag. The rest is assembled to the same degree of instruction, and none of it is left to preference. The outer flap folds so that the meat can pouch is uppermost, and the entrenching tool passes underneath that pouch and is bound to the roll. The roll itself is made on the ground, the shelter half spread flat, the blanket folded down to a quarter of its width and laid in the center of it. Underwear and socks and a handkerchief put between the folds of the blanket, where they will not work loose. The manual gives the order of operations the way it gives the order for stripping a rifle. And the result is meant to look the same on every back. There is even a minimum length. The assembled haversack and pack carrier, with the roll on it, should measure at least 27 inches, because below that the suspenders give no mechanical advantage and the load rides badly. It is a table figure like the rest of this, and it says what a properly made pack looks like, not what is on anyone's back on any given morning. In the assault, the blanket and the shelter half are not on a back at all. They travel in blanket rolls on the vehicles. So the bedding you have with you is a raincoat, and that was a deliberate decision. Every man would have a raincoat, the planners wrote, calling it a necessity in the wet climate of northern France. Everything else of that kind was taken off you before you sailed. Each man turned in 2 blankets, a wool undershirt, a pair of wool drawers, and a barracks bag, and the men in the combat units gave up more than that again. What they turned in did not go anywhere. Immediately before the landing and after it, large stocks of used clothing piled up, things handed in at the marshalling areas, and things simply left behind by troops going into combat. Many of the items were as good as new or needed only pressing. The chief quartermaster wanted them washed and issued back out rather than break into the stock of new clothing. So a good deal of what you are wearing has been worn by somebody who is not here. The food has its own line in the same plan. 1D ration and 1K ration on the man himself, and 4 candle-type heat units issued to him directly, rather than packed inside the ration. That detail is the visible end of an argument the quartermaster lost. The request to put the heat unit into the operational ration was turned down. So the fuel for warming the box travels loose in the haversack, 4 small candles of it, and the box travels somewhere else. The weights are worth saying carefully, because they are allowances and not loads. By the table of equipment of the 1st of June, the combined summer and winter clothing allowance for one man weighed 131 pounds. That is everything he is entitled to across 2 seasons, and it is precisely why the landing list above it is described as a very frugal allowance. The protective clothing issue, gas mask excluded, comes to a little over 12 pounds. 2 sea rations, weighed on their own, come to 10. What the observers found in every theater they went to was that an overburdened soldier going into battle discarded most of his equipment. The gas mask was the first thing to go. The report said masks were either thrown away outright or packed so that they were worthless by the time they were wanted. The impregnated clothing went the same way in spirit, if not in fact. Men on the transports were said to have washed the impregnate off their shoes, disliking the smell and the clammy feel of the treated cloth. The argument had been made before any of it happened, and made in the plainest words anybody used. A colonel back from West Africa said the army had cluttered its people up. "Carry nothing you can absolutely do without," he said. "Settle down and go to war." A general put the same thing as a principle. Simplicity of clothing and equipment is fundamental, and the armies of the Civil War crossed the country with 1 blanket, 1 rifle, some ammunition, and a haversack for whatever a man had picked up. Some things are never put down. Shoes are kept, because a combat infantryman in France wears them out and loses them at a rate no soldier at home approaches, and the entire replacement calculation was built on that fact. The gas mask stays where it came off. The kitchen that belongs to your company is not with your company. It bivouacs back with the battalion in the service area, alongside the kitchens of the other companies, and whatever it cooks has to travel to reach you. The arrangement rests on a judgment. Working without interruption matters more than being near. The service area can sit as much as 5 miles to the rear, and the meals will still arrive hot. Distance is not what the Army worried about. Distance is what the arrangement is built to defeat. By the manual, food in a rifle company belongs to a sergeant. The company headquarters has 3 principal non-commissioned officers: the first sergeant, the supply sergeant, and the mess sergeant, and it is the mess sergeant with his cooks who secures and prepares what the company eats. The preparation of meals is the cook's duty, and everything under it is done by whoever is detailed to the kitchen that day. Pots washed, vegetables peeled, food served. They cook on field ranges. The one built for a company weighs about 264 pounds with its utensils, and it is 2 things joined, an oven and a boiling plate. Units of it are installed across the front end of a truck bed, opening toward the rear. That is what a kitchen truck is, a stove standing in a truck, facing backward, set on the ground. A field kitchen is a hole with iron over it. The crew levels the ground, sets the range down, and tamps earth along the sides and the closed end so that no gas passes underneath. If the kitchen is staying, the crew digs a trench about 16 inches wide and 6 inches deep, long enough to work along. The same shovel and the same soil as your own hole, turned to another purpose. The coffee in the manual is a careful business. 3 pounds of coffee, fresh roasted and ground, to 7.5 gallons of water, will serve 100 men for 1 meal. The grounds go into a muslin bag, and the bag comes out of the brew in 12 to 15 minutes. The water is never boiled with the coffee in it. There is a standing instruction against making more than 1 meal's worth. Warmed over, the manual says, coffee is bitter and has lost its aroma. Every word of that is written for coffee roasted and ground close to the men who drink it. On the continent, the roasting and grinding operation was not scheduled to begin till the 5th of August, through June, and through the whole of July. Coffee in Normandy is soluble, or it is canned, and nothing else. The roasters are the reason. They are large and top-heavy, and the Army quartermaster decided at first not to bring them in over the beaches. That decision delayed them about a month. What goes out instead is an additional 1.5 pounds of soluble coffee for every 100 men, issued along with the operational rations. It is not enough, and the forward dumps knew it before anyone else did. Coffee went out of them faster than any plan had allowed for. Bread came before coffee, and it came from the British. Bakery companies with mobile British equipment began arriving on the 30th of June. And within 2 days, they were producing fresh bread at a rate that rose to 40 pounds for every 100 rations. A French bakery in an arsenal was put back into working order and started on the 9th of July, run by 27 French civilians under 2 American enlisted men. Bread went to everyone. The order was that fresh bread would be issued to all troops, regardless of the type of ration they were drawing, and through July practically every man on the continent got it. So the ordinary thing in the hedgerow is this: a ration opened on the ground, and in the other hand white bread baked the day before in a field, in a British oven on wheels with a net thrown over it. The planners had already set a limit on how long a man should live out of a box, and it was a short one. After it, something cooked was supposed to reach him. The fighting in the hedgerows ran about 6 weeks, and the drawing showed what that did to the plan. Far more 10-in-1 than anyone had ordered, and about half the planned number of K rations. The B ration was issued for the first time on the 8th of July. It is not a packaged ration. It is bulk food that a kitchen turns into hot meals, and even that first issue was received by more than half the troops in Normandy. And across the month it averaged 57%, but having it and cooking it were two different things. The company kitchens could not serve hot meals out of it while the Battle of the Hedgerows went on. That came in the lull, when the front stopped moving. Part of the delay was not the fighting at all. Requisitioning C and K rations was the easiest way to feed troops, and supply officers went on doing it after the situation no longer required it. No standard procedure for feeding men in the front line was ever written down. What arrived where you were depended on the unit you happened to be in. When it does not come at all, heat is whatever you can make out of what the ration left behind, and the method for that got written down and passed along. Fill an empty ration can with dirt, and soak the dirt with gasoline. Set the can in a hole about a foot deep. Turn a 10-pound tin upside down over it, punch the bottom through, and stand the meat can or the canteen cup on that. The big tin keeps the cup from blacking and hides the flame at the same time. It is the same arrangement as the range in the truck, minus the truck, the sergeant and the cooks. When it does come forward, it comes in round insulated containers, carried on quarter-ton trucks and trailers as far as the trucks can get. They bring mess gear too, and usually only the cover of the meat can. A man in the line keeps his cup and his spoon on him at all times. The fork and the deep half of the mess kit are not considered essential. When troops are advancing, the battalion staff picks out the ways along which food can be brought, and it is normal for the battalion's own supply officer to guide the party. Carrying the first hot meal to a new position, the jeeps try to reach each platoon headquarters. Where they cannot, details of runners wait at a prearranged place and carry the containers on from there. Cooks come up with the meals as often as it can be managed. They are not easily replaced, and commanders counted it worth doing anyway. Everything about the trip is an argument with cold. Insulation in the walls of the containers. A water can scalded out with boiling water first, and then wrapped in blankets, which buys the coffee inside it the length of the trip. By the manual, the trucks come forward immediately after dark, and the carrying parties take it on from there. Down a lane, through 2 gaps, along the foot of a bank, the last containers going to the platoon that is farthest out. What is inside them by then has taken the temperature of the ground it crossed. You eat it off the cover of your meat can, with your own spoon. The field on the other side of the bank belongs to somebody. Before the landing, the people of the Cotentin were concerned mainly with the breeding of cattle and the making of butter and cheese, and even the occupation sat lightly on that work. The accounts written of the district say they prayed for an Allied landing and hoped that it would happen far away from them. The farm is not scenery. It has an owner, and the owner is still on it. There is a great deal of food in Normandy, and the reason is not richness. The reason is isolation. The bombing of the railways and the bridges before the landing cut the country off from its own markets, and what the farms made could no longer be carried to the towns. In France as a whole, these things were scarce. Here they stayed where they were produced, because there was no longer any way to move them. The quartermasters came ashore in late spring expecting fruit and vegetables, and found eggs, butter, cheese, and fresh meat as well. Fresh fruit and vegetables were the first French supplies the American forces obtained after their landing. That was not what the orders had said. The original directives prohibited the purchase of such supplies altogether, and the prohibition lasted only as long as it took for the alternative to become plain. Let a surplus rot in the field, or feed it to the army. Before the beachhead was a month old, in the first days of July, the quartermasters, the general purchasing agent, the civil affairs officers, and the local French officials settled on a procedure. There were two lawful ways to take food off a French farm. You could purchase it at official prices or requisition it through the French government. Either way, it had to be food that French regional officials had declared surplus. Meat and dairy products stayed on that surplus list for a very short time. The price was argued. Farmers, wholesalers, and the agents of the cooperatives named figures somewhat higher than the ones the local government listed, and the compromise usually settled toward the lower figure. Then the agreement turned into hardware. Suppliers were provided with jute sacks. Units were given lists of suppliers and pickup points. Food behind a hedge was not discovered by anybody. It was collected from an address, against a list, by a truck. The window on the dairy is narrow, and it closes inside the season you are living in. Butter and cheese stand in the first list the quartermasters made, and by late summer they are off the surplus list altogether. What the army may buy from a farm is not what the farm produces. It is whatever a French official has written down as more than his own district needs. By the middle of July, the advance section that supplied the beachhead was receiving potatoes, carrots, and cabbages, and in the weeks that followed, $23,000 in cash went out for fruit and vegetables bought in Normandy. That traffic moves between one office and another, and it reaches you as a change in what the kitchen is issued. What a man does on his own is a different transaction entirely. Through the first month, individual efforts to obtain fruit, eggs, cheese, and other items from civilian sources, by purchase or by barter, were not uncommon. Purchase or barter is the whole of the phrase. Everything the official traffic touches has a shape you can point at. A declared surplus, a price agreed with an official, a list of suppliers, a jute sack, a pickup point, a truck at it in the morning. None of that is here. There is a yard, a door, a farmer who has eggs and butter and cheese and something killed that week, and a man out of the field with whatever is in his pockets. What goes back across the hedge in payment was never written down anywhere. The thing takes a few minutes. It happens within sight of your own field, and it leaves no paper at all. It was also forbidden. The advance section reminded every supply officer that such unofficial activity was not permitted, and that livestock was named specifically in the current theater directives as something not to be purchased, so the walk to the farm is not a small domestic scene. It is done against a standing order, and it was not uncommon in the first month. Both halves of that come off the same page. The same thing happened at a size no rifle company could manage. While the 9th Division stood in bivouac from the 1st to the 9th of July, its quartermaster supplemented the ration by purchasing 44 beef cattle and 6 calves from French civilian sources. It is recorded as a purchase and recorded just as plainly as a breach of the sanitary and policy directives both. 44 cattle and 6 calves in 9 days, bought by the officer whose work is feeding the division. The legal ways to break the sameness are thin. Some of the more enterprising units ate the B rations they had hoarded on their own kitchen trucks back in Britain, which was irregular and against no directive. At the end of July, the quartermaster of the First Army reported that 2 or 3 oranges a week for each man had proved very popular. 2 or 3 oranges a week. They came up from the beach with the ration, not out of a farmyard. There is other food on the beachhead, and none of it is yours. The plan to bring in food for the civil population was followed until it became evident that there was no food shortage in Normandy at all. At Utah Beach, a quartermaster base depot stacked flour, welfare biscuits, and soap in a pile that was not for troops, and most of that pile stayed where it was stacked. Captured stores were handled by inventory. As soon as abandoned supplies were found, they were placed under guard and counted, and the count went to the Army's captured material section, and out from there to the services that wanted it. The subsistence division handled all stocks of captured food. A captured depot is a place with a guard on it and a clerk in it, and you walk past. One captured thing did reach your hands and did work on food. The small heat tablets the Germans used were better than the American ones, and the volume says it without softening. Both types of the heating unit issued with the C ration, and the 10-in-1 were inferior to captured German heat tablets. A German tablet burning under an American can in a French field. That is the whole of what the other side ever contributed to your dinner, which leaves the animals standing in the grass. Fresh milk is the thing anyone would expect at this point in a country of dairy farms. And it is the one thing the Army would not allow. Its use was prohibited by the chief surgeon of the theater, on the ground that the herds had not been tested for tuberculosis by American standards, and no cow in Normandy undid that order. So the farm has an owner, and a price, and a list of what may be sold off it, and above all of that a doctor's order that settles the one thing you can see from where you are standing. The cow is on the other side of the bank, standing in the grass in the rain. The milk is not yours. Everything you are allowed to have comes up the road the ration comes up. It arrives in the same trucks, at the same distributing point, on the same day, and part of it is packed inside the ration itself. 12 cigarettes a day come up that way, counted as part of your food and with a printed place in the box. Nobody hands them to you separately, because they were never separate. The shop is a different matter. Post exchanges should have opened on the beachhead early in July, and they did not begin to operate until late August. The whole summer you are living in passes without one. On the 15th of June, the theater published a standard operating procedure for opening and running exchanges, and the theater exchange officer was to distribute ration cards, limiting each purchaser to a weekly ration. The procedure was ready. The shop it described was not. What ran instead was free issue. The First Army, the Advance Section, and the Office of the Chief Quartermaster agreed to continue the gratuitous issue of ration accessory kits until exchanges could be established, and that kit is the only channel by which tobacco, candy, and soap reach a man in a hedgerow. The kits were meant, after the assault, to go to combat troops only. They went to everybody, all the way to Paris. One kit travels every day with the ration issue for 200 men. What comes out of it in your hands is small and repetitive. cigarettes, 2 books of matches, a couple of ounces of hard candy, and about once a week a razor blade and a bar of soap. That is where today's opinions get formed, and nearly all of them are about shaving. Men wanted shaving soap rather than the brushless cream, and toothpaste rather than tooth powder. The 3-piece plastic razor clogged constantly when it was drawn across the cream, and under hot water it lost any resemblance to a precision instrument. They wanted the 2-piece metal one back. In a parcel of tobacco and candy, the thing that produced complaints was a shaving kit. Behind that is quartermaster's arithmetic and nothing else. The packet moves split in 3, the smoking part on a shorter cycle than the toilet articles, and the numbers written against each are per 200 men, per 400, per 800. It is a supply norm, not a count of what came into any particular field. During the fighting for Sanlo, the quartermaster of the First Army set down where this stood. The accessory kits were available, but they were inadequate, and the men wanted a wider choice than the kit allowed. Of other exchange goods, there was at most a 5-day supply for 45% of the troop strength. Against all that, one principle was held hard. Every soldier in combat would get cigars, cigarettes, and candy, regardless of who paid for them or how they were distributed. Post-exchange supplies were perhaps the most sought-after items on the continent, and troops were going to get them one way or another. None of this is scarcity yet, though. The cigarette problem began in October, months past the summer you were in. What you carried up the beach was a 7-day free issue of exchange goods, principally tobacco, candy, and razor blades. And in June and July, the tobacco is simply there, in the box, with the food. Letters run on another service entirely, and the manual that describes it was written in 1942. Before any of this, it puts the whole weight on one man. The unit mail orderly is the postmaster of his organization. He is detailed from the company he serves, and picked so that his ordinary duties will not interfere with the regular working of the mail. He should be intelligent and trustworthy, have some clerical ability, and where possible some previous postal experience. His day is a loop. He draws the incoming mail at the regimental post office and gives it out to the men of his organization. He collects the outgoing, examines it, and satisfies himself that every piece is properly prepared and correctly and sufficiently addressed before he hands it in. Empty mail bags go back to the regimental post office every day. What the division pays for all of that is one truck. A quartermaster company keeps a vehicle permanently dispatched to the nearest army post office, and that truck does nothing else. On the map, the letters and the food come to the same place. The division main post office is the principal postal agency of the division, and it will usually stand at or near the division distributing point for Class 1 supplies. A guard rides with the mail trucks and gives and takes receipts for the load, package by package. The address on the envelope is a number rather than a place. Rank, full name, Army serial number, then the company letter, then the regiment, then the number of the Army post office, care of the postmaster in New York. The number belongs to the unit and not to the ground, which is why moving does not change what the family writes on the envelope. The line under it carries no qualification. Under no circumstances will the location of the organization be given. Your own letters go without stamps, and the word free is written in the upper right corner in your own handwriting, not by the orderly and not with a stamp. It only works outward. Letters coming to you carry ordinary postage unless another soldier sent them, and so do airmail, registered and insured mail, and the newspapers, magazines, and books that somebody at home decides to send. When an address is wrong, the search runs upward in steps, from the company orderly to the regimental post office to division, and nothing goes higher until every local resource has been exhausted. At the top of it sits a file of locator cards for every man in the theater. The paper itself is short. Envelopes and writing paper for personal mail came from the British Stationery Office under reverse Lend-Lease, and the instruction that went with them was to use it sparingly, down to typing on both sides of thin second sheets. That is the material a man was expected to work with who was described by somebody who watched the whole war go through the service clubs as the readingest and writingest man this country ever produced. What came the other way was read to pieces. Surveys taken before the landing found only one man in 100 who said he had never seen the Army's own weekly paper, and the parts of it men named as best were the photographs, the war news, and the news from home. The least liked thing in it was the poetry. Censorship reaches you as a rule of conduct rather than as a man with scissors. In time you learn a great many small things about military affairs, trifles in themselves, which add up to a complete picture of operations if they get to spies or saboteurs. So you disclose military information to nobody, not even to your own family. What a censor actually struck out of a letter was never written down. There is no special delivery service to a theater of operations. A letter comes when it comes, to a point beside the ration truck, and everything else that reaches you from behind fits in one hand. The light is going out of the field now. You take the last of the day's 12 out of the box, and a book of matches out of the kit, and you light it. On the 11th of June, on the causeway below Carentan, the artillery observers could not see where their shells were landing. The hedgerows took the view away, and they adjusted their fire by sound, in the manner, the account says, of jungle warfare. Very few of the men saw the enemy at all. He moved low behind the banks, and they judged how close he was by the sound of his fire. That is the method of this country, set down in one line. Observation in the hedgerows was limited to a few hundred yards or less. An officer who came through the fighting for Saint-Lô said the artillery had to be corrected from the line itself by forward observers who sometimes had difficulty knowing just where they were, and that the trees delayed the adjustment because the vision was short. If the Germans hold the next hedge, they are under 100 yards from you. Rounds falling short would burst in the trees above your own men. Nothing saw better from higher up. Between the 25th of June and the 7th of July, in the zone of one corps, not a single photographic mission could be flown, for rain and poor visibility. The Germans did not defend every hedgerow, the history says, but nobody knew which ones they did defend without stepping out into the spotlight to find out. The lanes between the fields are sunken, often 4 to 6 feet below the banks on either side. Where the hedges are high and their tops arch over and shut out the light, they make a cave-like labyrinth, gloomy and damp. To get through a hedge you usually had to hack a way through, and that of course took time, and a German machine gun puts out a great many rounds in a very short time. So the field is red with the ears. On the night of the 10th of July, one division was shifting its units for a morning attack, and two things came out of the dark. German tank motors sounded in the distance. From just beyond the division's own positions came the noise of infantrymen digging in. Out of sight, a hedge or two away, other men were cutting the same holes into the same banks, and you could hear them doing it. The hearing runs both ways. The staff of the German Corps opposite drew the correct conclusion from tank motors heard during the night of the 2nd of July, assumed that an American attack was in the making, and laid interdictory fire on the likely assembly areas. Digging carries as well as engines do. Everything you do with a shovel in the dark is also a report to somebody. By day the line is quiet and the men stay in their holes. At night, the patrols move between the lines, and much of what goes back in the reports is made of sounds. Late in the morning of the 9th of July, an observation post reported tanks heard coming up from the south, and by 12:30, that battalion was holding off a counterattack. Tank destroyer crews peered through the drizzle of a foggy afternoon and listened for motors. A rifle company commander listed the faults. He had to get out of new men quickly, and one of them is about the ears alone, jumping at the sound of every outgoing and every incoming artillery shell. That is the difference between a man in his first week and a man in his third. The older one has sorted the outgoing from the incoming and no longer moves for either. It is taught rather than waited for. Divisions ran a course of 2.5 days for replacements, given by men with combat experience, and the first item on the program was how to live in a foxhole. Part of the purpose, the report says plainly, was to debunk the notions they had picked up in the rear. Those notions came from somewhere. When the Airborne Division handed over its ground at the end of June, it went out talking, telling the infantrymen who replaced it what it had done and how hard the Germans were. Some members of the new division became jittery, having been told what the place sounds like before hearing any of it themselves. What steadies a man against all that turns out to be another sound rather than any piece of equipment? A sergeant in this fighting put it in one line. Some men get very nervous in battle, and if the non-commissioned officer circulates among them and talks to them, it brings them out of that condition. Observers noticed the reverse working just as fast. A young officer under terrific tension passes it to everyone within earshot by the tone of his voice alone, before the words register at all. One thing you are taught to hear is the difference between your own weapons and theirs. A unit reported that it did nothing in training without battle noises and effects, and that captured Italian and German machine guns and machine pistols stood in for the enemy in its exercises, so that its men quickly learned to tell their own fire from the other kind. The weapon that earns the most respect here is the mortar, and not because it comes quietly. The German mortars, one officer said, were very, very efficient. They were registered on the hedgerow lines and blanketed all the routes of advance. The method was plain. Pin the men down along a lateral hedge with automatic fire. Then put a mortar concentration onto that hedge. The bank you are lying behind was measured for by somebody before you got here. Language carries further than machinery. One night an outpost heard tanks approaching and was told by higher headquarters that American tanks were in the vicinity. A column of tanks and infantry was let through, and the mistake was noticed only because the soldiers walking in it were speaking German. None of it is a guarantee. On the same night, at another corner of the same position, neither outpost saw nor heard the enemy come through the orchard, and some of the sounds you would expect are simply absent. Do not use bird calls as signals at night, one battalion commander wrote. Because there are no birds in a battle area, they all leave. Cats and dogs stay, so dog barks and cat calls will do. Your own noise is the part you can do something about. Men called their mess utensils an annoying companion on the march and an alarm bell on patrol, and wanted a more compact meat can with the knife fork and spoon firmly anchored. What they used instead was the German combination fork and spoon. The quartermaster of one division in this fighting said every man who could get his hands on one was using it. Identification tags rang as well, and men cut rings from old gas mask hose and slipped them over the edges. Before a patrol goes out, its leader checks that the arms and equipment are carried so that they will not glisten or rattle. A cough is muffled with the cap over the mouth, practiced in everyday training until it becomes a habit. At night, the rule is 2 words long: be quiet and do not smoke. By your second week, you can lie still and name what goes over without lifting your head. And the last sound that still belongs to you is the small knock of a spoon against a can, which you learn to make quietly. The light in Normandy does not go quickly. The accounts that give an hour give it for the beginning of June, and they give it twice, in different places and about different fields. Twilight lasted until 11 at night. By the middle of July, the day is shorter, and by how much nobody wrote down. What holds either way is the shape of it. The evening is not an event. It is a long slope, and the whole of it is usable. The clock is worth a word, because there are 2 of them in the field. Everything on your side is reckoned by double British summer time. The Germans keep theirs by Central European time. When the accounts say a thing happened at a certain hour, that is your hour and not theirs. 2 armies stand in one small country, and they do not agree about what time it is. What the light is for is preparation. The general policy is to break off offensive action early enough in the afternoon to let a position be organized properly before darkness. The exact spot is picked while it can still be seen, and often it is not occupied until nightfall. You look at ground in the light and you move into it in the dark. Everything done from now until the light is gone is done for the benefit of the hours after it. Some of it is work that cannot be done later at all. A compass is read by daylight or at night by a light held in a sheltered place, and never otherwise. So the reading that matters is taken while there is still sun on the map. Wire has to be laid while there is enough light to see where it is being laid, and walked when there is not. Patrols hook into the battalion switchboard at dusk and go out along their route paying wire off a spool behind them. Telephones are manned continuously from dark until daylight, which does away with the need to ring them at all. Somebody is always holding the handset, so nothing on the line ever has to make a noise. The evening is also where the day's food begins. A ration cycle is a meal, and the 2 that follow it, and the manual says that when supplies are delivered during the night, the most convenient meal to start the cycle with is the evening one, supper. So what you eat tomorrow before light, and what you eat tomorrow at noon, comes up the road in the same load as the thing you eat tonight, and all of it arrives in the dark. Supper belongs to that hour by rule. In combat, kitchens are grouped back in sheltered places where the meals can be prepared without interference. Immediately after dark, the trucks bring the cooked food forward, so that carrying parties can take it on from there. That is a rule written for darkness, and in this country, the darkness is late. A rule that begins the moment it is dark cannot begin before the light has finished going. The manual is just as firm about the order of business. When a unit reaches new ground, unsling the packs, pitch the tents, and serve a hot meal first. The same manual allows that the meal may not come. The commanding general of a division or somebody above him may direct that every man carry a field ration as part of his field equipment. The reason given is the roads and the transport, which may hold the cooked meals up, A ration carried for that reason has a name. It is called an individual reserve. That is what the box in your pack is, and this is the hour of the day when it stops being spare weight and becomes a possibility. There is a procedure even for being in the wrong field at supper. If the evening finds you away from your own company and another organization is near you, you can always get a meal from it. You report to its first sergeant or its mess sergeant, give your name and your own unit, and explain how you came to be separated. Nothing about that is generous. It is written down as a rule, in the same flat voice as the rest, and it works, because a kitchen cooking for a company can always feed one more man. Things that could not be carried in an advance reach the hedgerow at this hour too. 2-burner stoves normally stay in the vehicles, and forward of a line that is still moving there are no stoves, and no pots at all. They come up later, brought by supporting or relief troops, and where the front has stopped they are sometimes set down in the holes themselves. That is a measure of how long a position has stood. A stove in a foxhole means nobody has gone anywhere for a while. The kitchen is awake outside its own hours anyway. Every mess is supposed to keep a small pot going for the kitchen detail and for the men of the guard who want coffee earlier or later than the times when the company is fed. It is a detail from a manual about garrison messes, and it survives into the field for the obvious reason. The men who are up when nobody else is up are the ones who need something hot. The pot is not for the company. It is for the ones on watch. Where it can be done at all, a battalion is taken off the line for its hot meal rather than fed in place, and that too happens just after dark. Trucks are sent up, 40 or more of them. The men are hauled back to a bath unit where they wash, eat a cooked meal, and lie down in a quiet area. And the next day they are re-equipped as far as possible and go back. None of that could be attempted in daylight. The whole exchange lives inside the dark. Movement belongs to the dark for the same reason food does. Marches in hot weather are made in the early morning, the late afternoon or at night, and the meal served before one is supposed to carry sugars and fats. What the beachhead added to that rule was the blackout. And the blackout there was not a figure of speech. One ordnance company reported that with no lights of any kind permitted after dark, sorting supplies at night was simply not possible, and that in the mornings they were finding signal and engineer stores mixed in among their own boxes. On the roads it costs time. On the night of the 7th of July, a task force got itself south of the east-west highway, only after great difficulty, because of blackout discipline and the traffic on the road. Every load moving towards you tonight is moving that way, slowly, by feel, behind somebody walking. The containers that hold your supper are somewhere in that, and so is tomorrow's breakfast. So the hour is not a settling down. It is the hour the position wakes up in. Wire is going out. Holes are being deepened. The men who were farthest out are coming in a little. And somewhere behind the second hedgerow, a truck is being loaded in the last of the light. On the bank above your own hole, that light is still lying along the top, thin and level, and taking its time to go. The work of the night is that nothing happens. That is the standard it is held to, and meeting it takes people. Local security was got by keeping between 1/4 and 1/2 of front-line units on the alert at all times, and reserve units behind them were required to do the same, so that the defense faced every way. Nobody in that arrangement is doing anything. The manual is exact about the shape of a watch. A guard is divided into 3 reliefs, and each man stands 2 hours on and has 4 hours off. That is the garrison book, written for a post with a gate, and the hedgerow does not owe it anything. What carries over is the 11th of the general orders a sentry learns: to be especially watchful at night, and to challenge all persons on or near the post. Sentries at night were posted in pairs and held absolute silence and immobility. All movement in forward areas after dark was prohibited, which is a rule with a purpose behind it. If nothing of yours is moving, then anything that moves is not yours. The position stops being a place where people go about and becomes a set of fixed points, each with a man in it who stays until somebody comes for him. 2 words hold the whole thing together, and they change every night. There is a password and there is a countersign, and they are not the same word. In one sector they were red and river. A sentry who challenges by calling out both of them has given away the answer with the question, and so has one who halts a man at such a distance that anyone nearby can hear the challenge and the reply. In the field, the challenge is made without standing up. Say halt, veterans advised, but stay in your foxhole and keep the challenged party covered. The rule behind it is a short one, and it is not comfortable. Everything beyond your own lines, every person and every sound, is counted as hostile. What goes out past that line goes out under rules of its own. A patrol is told off early enough for the order to reach the regiment by noon, so the man leading it can look at the ground in daylight. Reconnaissance patrols are kept small, and they work under a rigid rule that rifles will not be fired, whatever offers itself. Grenades go along for an emergency and nothing else. New men are taken out on practice patrols first, as little as 100 yards to the front, and the distance is increased a night at a time. Forward of the line there are listening posts. A combat outpost establishes them to warn the front line organizations that hostile raiding or attacking parties are coming. The manual gives the reason plainly. The outpost exists so that the main body can rest or work undisturbed. Somebody is awake so that somebody else can lie down. Where the practice was written down, a listening post was 4 men with one of them sleeping at a time, and a telephone line back to the command post. The same report adds, walking sentries invite disaster. Listening is trained. You learn to tell apart the different kinds of noise. Men digging with shovels, men cutting wire, men walking, and separately the sounds a helmet and equipment make when they catch on wire and brush. The instruction that follows is 3 words long. Stop often and listen. In this country, observation was normally limited from one hedgerow to the next, and after dark, that limit closes to nothing. Some of what you hear is arranged to be heard. German sniper and anti-tank crews leaving a position sometimes left firecrackers behind on a slow fuse, going off at odd intervals, so that the position seems still occupied. Some of it is only cattle. One machine gunner found his field of fire masked by a herd of cows, and a sergeant tried to move them off the line with stones and empty shell cases. Against all that, the rule is to keep the rifle quiet. Rifle fire at night is obviously ineffective and reveals positions. Firing tracer was prohibited for the same reason. Against the urge there is training and strict discipline. For men in battle for the first time it is a great temptation to fire and ask questions later. By day the order in the hedgerows runs the other way. Cover with fire any assigned sector you believe to be occupied. You live between the two. Light, when it comes from above. If you hear the sound of a flare, you drop to the ground and stay motionless before it bursts, and you do not look at it because a bursting flare will blind you for a moment. If one is already burning above you, you stop where you are and stay still until it has burned out. Before dark, you make sure no piece of equipment will glisten in that light or jingle when you move. And you cover the luminous dial of your watch. What a flare does to a field is on record from one orchard, where the slopes went fully lit and the light died again almost at once. That is the whole of it. Something turns the field white, everything in it holds still, and then the field is black again and the carrying goes on. In the hedgerows, the carrying is night work. In daylight it failed. An attempt to push ammunition, food, and medical supplies forward broke down under artillery fire. So on the night of the 17th of July, 2 volunteer parties of 20 men each went up on foot, working their way hedgerow by hedgerow to 2 battalions that had been cut off. Relief of a position moved 4 or 5 soldiers at a time. Everything else moves in the same hours. A battalion found about midnight digging in east of a ridge was ordered on, and that night advance met almost nothing and had the regiment in position by morning. Sleep is fitted into the gaps in that. A shelter half goes over the hole, with a small opening left to observe and to fire through. The blanket and the shelter half are the roll a man carries, and closer to the line even that goes. Forget your jeep, your bedding roll, and everything you cannot carry on your back. On an outguard, the equipment stays on, and the weapon stays at hand. The shoes and socks come off once in the day to rub the feet, and the day has to be chosen. The last box is the supper unit. The can comes out of it first, serve-a-lot sausage, and the sugar tablets after that. What does not come out is the 2-ounce bar of the field ration D, because that one is not supper but the emergency ration, meant to be carried and not eaten. Later they put a little soluble coffee into the supper box and replaced the dextrose tablets, which men threw away, with caramels. You eat before the watch, sitting down, while there is still something to see by. What is left over goes into a pocket, because there is nowhere else. A stick of gum, spearmint, peppermint or pepsin, and the few cigarettes that came in the unit which cannot be lit, because smoking at night in forward areas is prohibited, and no fires are built on an outguard. So the cigarettes wait, and the flattened carton waits with them, and both of them are still in the pocket. When somebody comes to shake you for the watch, you can measure what the hedgerows cost without counting anybody. 12 divisions spent 17 days in them and came about 7 miles west of the Veer, a little over half of that east of the river. 17 days. For a walk you could do in an afternoon on a road. The offensive that did it ended on the 19th of July, the day after Sanlo was taken. Then, for about a week, nothing much happened. The next attack was not ready. The men rested and fixed what the hedgerows had broken. Packs cut open on thorn, tools blunted on roots, boots wet since the beach. Replacements came up and were put into squads that had room for them. And in that week, the kitchens came forward. The record is very plain about it and very dry. The quiet period before the breakout, it says, made possible increased comfort such as hot meals, showers, and clothing changes. That is the sentence. Hot meals are listed third, after nothing and before laundry. What is worth knowing is that the food had been there the whole time. The B ration, the one that comes in bulk and has to be cooked, the one that is not a box, had reached the continent early in the month and was issued for the first time on the 8th of July. Even that first issue reached more than half the troops in Normandy. It sat in the dumps and on the kitchen trucks. For 2.5 weeks, it could not be turned into anything a man could eat, because that takes a kitchen, and a kitchen takes a place where the shooting has stopped long enough to set up a stove. So the thing that had been missing was never the food. It was the quiet. When it came, the stoves went up in orchards a mile or two back, and the containers went forward on jeeps in the evening, and men who had eaten out of cardboard since the middle of June stood in a line in a field and held out a mess kit and had it filled with something hot. It did not last long. On the 25th the breakout began, and after that the army moved faster than its own kitchens. The distances between the dumps and the leading units stretched out. The kitchens stayed behind because they could not keep up, and the men in front went back to the cold box and to the 10-in-1 that a squad heats between them when there is time. The hot meal in Normandy was not the end of anything. It was a week. What is left of all this is mostly paper, and the paper is not about the war. It is quartermaster returns. How many rations of which type went out in Normandy in July, and what share of them were the kind you cook? It is a chief quartermaster noting in the middle of the month that units were eating 140% of the expected 10-in-1s and half the expected K rations. It is a line recording that 2 or 3 oranges a week proved very popular, written in the same flat hand as the tonnages above it, and given the same amount of room on the page. And it is photographs. The Signal Corps went everywhere with cameras, including into fields where nothing was happening, and what they brought back is not the war that gets pictured. A cook bent over a stove in a farmyard with steam going up past a wall. A line of men in a lane with mess kits, waiting, none of them looking at the camera. A man sitting on the bank of a hedge with a tin open on his knee, eating with the small spoon that came with it. They are dated, most of them, to the day, and the dates are the dates of nothing in particular. A Thursday near Carentan, a morning outside Isigny. The captions give a division and a village, and nothing else, because nothing else happened. The banks themselves were much older than any of it. Norman farmers had been raising them for centuries to keep the ocean wind off the crops and the stock in the field, and to give the house its firewood. They were built to make a small, walled, sheltered place where things could be kept alive. For 6 weeks in the summer of 1944, they did something else, and then they went back to being what they were. Sleep well. Whatever is in the kitchen where you are, you can get up and reach it, and nobody has to drive it out to you in the dark. Good night.